Hi darlings, Mimi G here with another tutorial as part of the Mimi G for Michael Levine collaboration. Today we're going to be working on McCall's pattern 70-20, which is this really cool tunic that I have on with some modifications. I made, wore, and posted this tunic on my blog not long ago and it was a huge hit. I just made some slight modifications to the pattern, like lengthening it to make it more of a dress length, and then I also changed the collar, which is a cowl neck, to more of a hood. And everyone really seemed to love that. So I'm going to show you how to make those slight modifications, cut and sew this pattern. You're going to need pattern 70-20 by McCall's, which is this pattern here. You're also going to need a tape measure, some scissors, one for fabric and one for paper. You should never mix the two. Some pattern weights or large washers from your local home improvement store. A chalk roller or piece of chalk, and a seam ripper just in case you make a mistake and you need to rip out your seams, and of course some pins and a ruler. I'm going to be using a double knit for my tunic, but you can use a sweater knit, a cotton knit, an interlock, and in the back of the envelope, on the back of the envelope, it tells you exactly what fabrics they suggest. I like to use a double knit because it holds the shape of the collar and the hood really nicely. So I'm going to be using this black fabric that you see here. Now I have folded it in half lengthwise with selvage edges meeting and right sides facing. Once you have your fabric laid out, let's go over the pattern pieces we're going to need. The pattern envelope comes in extra small, small, and medium, and then the other pattern envelope will have the large, extra large, and extra, extra large. Now I normally would cut an extra small because there's kind of a lot of ease in this pattern, but because I wanted it to be loose fitting and loose around my hips, I chose to cut out size small, which is what you see here. Cut out whatever size you need, and you're going to be cutting out pattern piece number 1, pattern piece number 3, the sleeve, which is pattern piece number 6. You're going to be cutting out pattern piece number 7, which are your pockets, and then pattern piece number 4, which is your collar, and this I made a modification to. So, let's start with the two main pieces. I want you to grab pattern piece 1 and 3, and you're going to take some measurements. You just want to make sure that it's long enough if you want to make the dress version. Now I am only 5 feet 4 inches, and most patterns are drafted for a woman 5 feet 8 or 9 inches. So usually I'm okay with the length. If you're any taller than me, you might want to double check just to make sure that your dress isn't too short, as this is supposed to be a tunic and not a dress. So I want you to take your measurements. First you're going to measure the pattern piece, minus the 5/8 of an inch for seam allowance, and you're going to see how long it is. So that's about 34 1/4. Now for me that's plenty long, but if you want to make sure, then measure from your shoulder down to however long you're comfortable with, and then base those numbers against your pattern piece and add that amount to the length. If you want to add length to the bottom of your pattern piece, make sure to measure out however much you're going to need and then make a mark. Let's say you needed to add 2 inches. Measure down 2 inches, make a little line all the way across. Extend your sides. And instead of cutting here, you're now going to cut around your new line. If you add to the front, remember to add to the back. Now piece number 4 is your collar. Now yours is all one piece, but if you look at mine, you can see that I've cut mine in half along the fold line. If you look at your pattern piece, which should be all one piece right now, it says fold line and it has a line all the way across. I want you to cut right across that so that you end up with 2 pieces like this. As I mentioned earlier, I have my fabric already folded in half lengthwise with selvage edges meeting, and both of my pattern pieces for the front and the back fit next to each other. Depending on your size, you may need to have them like this as opposed to right next to each other. You'll also notice that these are cut not on the fold, so you're going to have a seam like you see here down the back and front of your tunic. If you do not want a seam and you want to cut your piece on the fold, you simply make sure that your center fold line or your center back or front line is on the fold of your fabric. Now you'll need to remember that you need to minus the 5/8 of an inch allowance given for the front and back. So you'll need to fold over 5/8 of an inch all the way down the front and back of these pattern pieces, and then lay it against the fold of your fabric. Now you have removed that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I personally like the seam down the middle. I think it adds a nice design interest. So I'm going to leave it and I'm going to cut my pieces not on the fold. So use your pattern weights. You're going to lay them around your pattern pieces and you're simply going to cut around your pattern pieces both front and back, making sure that you transfer any notches that you see at the shoulder, at the neck, at the armhole, at the body. Make sure that all of these are transferred and snipped into before you remove your pattern piece. Now we're going to cut pattern piece number 4, but first we need to modify it to create the hood. Now you should have cut it down the middle, and now you should have 2 pieces. Now we're going to extend this so that we have 11 inches added to the middle of this pattern piece. So what you're going to do is you're going to place the bottom pattern piece, or one of the pieces, against the fold of your fabric, because we're cutting these out on the fold, and I want you to put your pattern weights on it so it doesn't shift. And then what you're going to do is you're going to measure 11 inches. And you're going to place your second pattern piece here, also against the fold at that 11 inches mark. And you're going to put your pattern weights down. Now we've added 11 inches to this pattern piece. And now we're going to join it here on the outer edge where it has this kind of curve. So you're going to kind of create a curve to join these. You just eyeball it. And now we're going to cut this entire piece out. Make sure to snip into your notches, and also you'll see triangles here, so you want to make sure that you snip whatever size you've cut. I made a little snip where it says small. I'm going to follow my guide. I'm going to snip into my notches. Now when you remove your notches, or your pattern weights I should say, you have one really gigantic piece. That looks like this. Now you're going to cut out your sleeve and your pocket. Now you're going to lay your pattern weights on your sleeve pattern and you're going to cut around it just the way we did for everything else. But I wanted to point out that for your pocket you need to cut out 4 of these. So you're going to lay your pocket pattern, put your weights on it, cut out all the way around so you end up with 2, and then you're going to do that all over again so you end up with 4 pocket pieces. Let's review the pattern pieces you should have cut out. You should have 4 pieces for your pocket. You should have your hood, 2 sleeves, and then of course your front and your back pieces. Now I want to point out really quickly that on the front and back pattern pieces you're going to see 2 dots and a notch. This is where your pocket goes, so I want you to make sure that you transfer over those 2 circles and that notch on both your front and back pattern pieces. We're going to start with our front piece. So we're going to sew the center front seam all the way down, and I'm using a lighter color thread just so you guys can see it on the black fabric, but you should be using something that matches your fabric. So start by pinning at your center front notches and then pin at the top and then pin at the bottom And of course you are only doing this if you cut your pattern pieces not on the fold. If you cut your pattern pieces on the fold, then you just skip this part. Once you have your center front pinned all the way down, we're going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Now that we have sewn all the way down the center front, when you open your front pattern piece, it's now one full piece. And you're going to do the same thing to the back. You're going to pin the center back and you're going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now you should have sewn the center front and center back of your pieces. And I want you to go ahead and press your seams open so that they are nice and crisp. You should get in the habit of serging your seams if you have a serger, just because it gives you a nice professional finished look. Now once you press your seams open, we're going to start attaching our pocket pieces. So I want you to grab one pocket piece, and we're now working on the right side of your fabric. So grab your back pattern piece, and the right side of your fabric should be facing up so that you can see it. And the right side of your pocket piece should be facing the right side of your fabric. So right side to right side. And we're going to align your notch and the dots. I made notches for my dots, but if you did, little dots, that's fine. You're going to align your notch and your dots, and you're going to pin. And you're going to do this for both sides of the front and both sides of the back. I'm going to show you how to do this. Now that it's pinned, we're going to sew using a 1/4 inch seam allowance across the pocket. Now it looks like this, and when you turn it to the inside, it'll be nice and finished. So we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Right side facing up, grab another pocket piece. We're going to align notches and dots. And you're going to pin. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to sew a 1/4 inch, and you're going to continue this process on the front pattern piece. Okay, now we're going to sew front to back at our side seams and around our pocket. So first I want you to lay front to back with right sides facing each other, and we're going to pin. And then we're going to pin at our pocket. Now, this is not tricky, but I want you to make sure you can see that our pockets are facing the right side, so even they are facing right sides. And we're going to pin at the dot, or in my case a notch, because I made a little notch for my dot. So we're going to pin there, make sure that your seams are aligned. And then you're going to pin again where your other dot or notch was. And then you're going to pin at the bottom. So now we've pinned at the bottom. We've pinned at both notches or dots depending on what you did. And we're going to lay our pocket so it's nice and flat. And we're going to pin around our pocket. And then of course we pinned along the side. You can add one more to keep everything together. You're going to pin the same way on the other side. Now we're going to sew all the way down. We are going to stop at this point here. We're going to back stitch, and then we're going to start again here, back stitch and finish, and then we're going to sew around our pocket. Using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we're going to sew until we get to this first dot or notch, and then we're going to back stitch. And now we're going to move all the way down until we get to that other dot or notch. Going to back stitch and sew to the bottom. Now that we have this pocket opening here, that's where we stick our hand. We're going to sew around our pocket. Now using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to start sewing all the way around. So put your needle in. And you're going to back stitch, but don't go beyond the stitching. And you're going to sew all the way around. Going to sew until you reach your stitching line, and then back stitch. And then when you turn this over, you can see we've created our pocket. You're going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, now I don't know about you, but I don't like my pockets flapping around underneath my dresses if it's not attached to a waistband. So I'm going to stitch down my pockets to the front of my dress. So make sure that you are working with the front of your dress and that you have folded over your pocket. I have folded my pocket, or folded my pocket to the front so that now we have our seam here. You can see it's nice and flat. And if you were to turn it around, just to give you an example, I'm going to pin this. If I turn this over to the right side, my pocket is to the front of my body, because when I put my hands in my pocket, they're going to be in the front of my body. So you want to make sure that you don't put your pocket towards the back. You want to make sure it's towards the front. And this is optional. I mean, if you want your pocket flapping around, that's cool. Once it's nice and flat like this, you can go ahead and pin it only to your top layer. I don't want to pin to the back. I want to pin only to my front. And you want to make sure it's flat, so keep feeling, make sure there's no ripples or folds underneath there. Now that I have it pinned, I'm going to use the guide that's already on my pocket, that stitching line. I'm going to put only this top layer, not the back, so make sure to keep the back of your dress free. So you can see I'm only working on one layer, the top layer. I want you to put your needle in at the corner, right? At this corner here, but up here. And you're just going to follow your existing stitching line, making sure that as you're sewing that everything is nice and flat. And you're going to stop again at this corner. Back stitch. Now when you turn your dress right side out, you'll see the pocket is stitched down to the front of the dress, and you can put your hand in it. And now it won't be flopping around, and you can just cut off any loose threads. You're going to do the same thing to the other pocket. Once you've done both pockets, I want you to give this another good press. Press it on the right side of your fabric, not the wrong side of your fabric. You want to make sure it's nice and flat, you don't have any bubbles or ripples. Once you've done that, turn it back to the wrong side, and we're going to pin our shoulders and sew our shoulders together. So align your notches for your shoulder. Wrong side's facing, or right side's facing. Pin and then sew across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have sewn our shoulders and our side seams, we're going to attach our sleeves and then our hood. You're going to grab one sleeve and we're going to fold it and pin with right sides facing, so the right side of your fabric is facing, and we're going to pin down the sleeve. And using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to sew, starting at the bottom. Now we're going to turn our sleeve right side out. And now we're going to attach it to our dress. So with your dress still with wrong sides out, find the arm's eye. And we're going to put our sleeve right side inside of our dress. And we want to make sure that we're on the right side. So you can see I'm on the wrong side because I have 2 notches here and 1 notch here. So this sleeve needs to go on the other side. So what you're going to do is you're going to align your side seam of your dress to the underarm seam of your sleeve, and we're going to pin there first. As you can see, right sides are facing. The right side of the sleeve is facing the right side of my dress, and I'm going to pin here first. Then I'm going to make sure that's in there. I'm going to align my double notches. That's the back of our dress, the back of the sleeve. And I'm going to pin, and I'm going to align my single notch, which is the front of our sleeve. And then I'm going to pin that center dot that you should have marked on your sleeve. I always just make a little notch to the shoulder seam. And I'm going to pin. And now we're going to sew starting at the underarm seam all the way around. Using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Cut off any loose threads. If you have a serger, then you can serge your edge, removing 3/8 of this, leaving only a 1/4 inch. If you don't have a serger or don't want to serge it, you can simply trim your seam allowance to a 1/4 inch. And you're going to attach your other sleeve the same way. Now we're going to sew our hood, so we need to close out the center back seam. So I want you to fold it so that right sides are facing, and I want you to align your notches and pin there first. We're going to sew along the long edge. Pin your other notch. And then of course pin at the bottom. And we're going to use 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now you're going to press this seam open all the way, and once you do that, we're going to fold this in half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one end and I'm going to turn this into itself. And now we're going to create a basting stitch all the way around here. Just a really long and very loose stitch just to hold these together while we attach them to our neck. So as long a stitch as you can make with your machine. I have the back of my dress facing me, and I'm going to put it inside of my hood. So that the hood is down over the dress, and I'm going to align my center back seam on my dress to the center back seam of the hood, and I'm going to pin there first. Right sides are facing. Now your hood has both right sides showing because we have, in essence, lined it to itself. And then I'm going to align the two front notches of my hood to the two front notches of my dress. And pin there and there. And then you should have had dots or little notches that you created for those triangles. Those are for your shoulder seams, so they should align to your shoulder seam on your dress. Pin there, and then the same thing on the other shoulder. And we're going to sew all the way around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And using your regular length stitch, so go back to a 2.5 or a 3. And I'm going to start at the center back. Cut off any loose threads. If you have a serger, serge your seam allowance. If not, you can just trim your seam allowance to a 1/4 inch. When you pull your hood, you will see this very long hood that you can also wear as just a cowl neck. All that's left to do is to finish the sleeve and your hem allowance.
I'm rolling.
I'm going to do a double fold on my sleeve. So I'm going to turn under 3/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to turn under a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to sew close to the edge. You might want to press and pin this out before you sew it. I'm just going to eyeball it. And you're going to do the same thing to the other sleeve. Now we're going to sew the hem of our dress, so you might want to serge this first before you sew your hem. I'm going to measure out 1.5 inches. And I'm going to use that 1.5 inches all the way around. You might want to measure and pin it out before you start to sew it. And I'm going to sew with my presser foot along the cut edge of my hem allowance. Check for any loose threads. Give this all a good press, and we are done. That's all there is to it. I can't wait to see all of your hooded tunics or dresses. Until next time, peace. That's all there is to it. I can't wait to see all of your hooded